all those things. Because the reason is these actually channels are very scalable. They don't require a huge investment, right? All they require is an innovative idea around a free tool or a unique referral value proposition, which makes user come to your product again and again, or build the SEO tech capabilities so that over time you can keep getting free traffic from Google. Be hacky in that way, but they're not something which can be done by spending more and more money, right? And and at the same time, I also say that understand all the channels, because most of the time 1 or 2 channels are going to work for you. Like for Upgrad or any education tech company that I have kind of seen, referral works very well, right? For Byju's, on the ground sales work very well, right? You take any product. For Uber in India, referral worked very well, right? So for any product, 1 or 2 channels are going to work. So which is why you should be familiar with all the channels, but you should focus on more like tech-based channels than others, right? And this is one of my favorite things from HubSpot blog. So HubSpot wrote this blog around how we build like $100 billion company or so. Uh, and they say that the PMF is one part of the piece. Product and market are two pieces. There are two other pieces. One is channel, one is model. Model is business model, right? And there should be a PMF, right? But there should be a product channel fit also. There should be a channel to model fit also. There should be a model to market fit also. This is actually confusing. This actually feels like it's actually complicated, but it's not. Let me take you through one example and it will become very clear. These are different channels. I'm not going to go through this, but this is just for reference. I'm going to skip this. The case study that I'm going to pick to explain you the earlier chart, which is very useful for PMs in product market model channel, is something like, let's say you're selling a premium edtech product. So like Udacity or Upgrad, right? You're selling 50,000 rupees courses, or even Reforge, right? Now your product is very simple, like premium edtech. The channels for these is search or referral. And I have just put it there, bear with me, I think I'll explain the logic. The model, business model will only be viable if customer acquisition cost is 30% of lifetime value, because beyond that, there is sales cost, there is content cost, there is running the, I think, central team cost, right? So CAC should be less than 30% of LTV is the business model that you're going ahead with. The market is IT professionals, because they want to kind of move into product companies, and they will be paying, they also have the paying capacity, right? So we have figured out the positioning, which is premium edtech. We have figured out the model in the market, right? Now coming to the questions. Product market is determined by the question whether IT professionals need a premium edtech product. The answer is they do, because the completion rate for MOOCs is 2%, right? So people actually register for MOOCs, which is online courses, and only 2% of them complete. The premium edtech product actually asks for a bigger commitment, but it also ensures that there are placement capabilities, there are like resume reviews and all that. And all those things actually move people forward in their learning, right? So I will not, I'll just leave it there. The second is the channel to model, right? Which is, can search or referral deliver CAC equals to 0.3 LTV? If it cannot, then there is no channel model fit, right? So you can go to channels like Facebook also, and you can try to find out the same equation. If the equation holds for a channel, scale it out, right? Scale it unless it breaks. And if channel is not working out, don't do it. Like one of the things that people have realized that LinkedIn more often than not does not work for even edtech products. And that is very surprising, because you'll feel that LinkedIn is the place for edtech products, but that's not the case, unfortunately. The third is market model, right? Which is for the IT professional, do they have capacity to pay this premiumness, like 50,000 rupees for a course? And the answer is yes. And the fourth is product channel. Can you sell this product, which is a 50,000 rupees, through the channels that you have figured out, which is search and referral? And the answer is no. So search and referral can actually give you leads, but you cannot sell the premium products through those. This is basically high touch sales. And to do high touch sales, you need an inside sales kind of team. And that is what all these companies like Bajus and Udacity have done. They have inside sales team, which actually talks to users. They convince them that, oh, it is worth it to spend 50,000 rupees on this product, right? So at a product channel thing, this actually breaks. And then you realize, oh, for lead generation, we can use the search and referral, but ultimately we need an inside sales team to actually make it happen. So this framework will help you with the GTM strategy. And we are done, I think 67. Time for questions.
Thanks, Deepak. So going ahead, we'll go with Dave's question. So he asked that there are very rare cases when retention curve doesn't flatten, instead surprisingly rises by D60 by D90 after dipping in between. Can you talk briefly about that, like a convex graph?
Yeah, it's a unicorn. I think retention curve more often than not, in terms of DAO, I haven't seen that behavior much, but it happens when you have people, something like a travel product, right? In travel, if you're trying to measure M1, M2, M3, M4 kind of retention, what you will see is in M1 there was a retention, and then for 2 months that retention kind of dips, and then M4 say again rises because people are planning travel after 3 months. They're not going to travel every month, right? So depending on the nature of the product, the curve can actually rise after getting through a dip, right? But it is going to stabilize at some point. Like it's not going to go rise, rise, rise. It will be like rise, dip, rise, dip, rise, dip, right? The one place where it should definitely rise, okay, is SaaS products. So something like a Slack or something like a Freshdesk. If it is not rising, it is problematic because that means people are not adding more of your products into there or more of the people into your product. So most of the time SaaS products, they start with 10 people and then they scale to 50 people, right? So which is why in SaaS products, you often see the revenue churn negative. So revenue retention actually rises up in SaaS products, right? So that's a very beautiful question. I think, thank you for bringing that because it actually made me kind of clarify this.
Okay, great. So we take another question here. Anshut asks that as a product guy, would you support Flipkart entering into game space? Flipkart is not known for that, and there are already established players in the gaming space.
It's a slightly sensitive question. I'm from Flipkart, so I think you already know the question. I'm leading this product, so if I don't have conviction for it, who would, right? The reason I think Flipkart and gaming actually makes a lot of sense for Flipkart is because right now the battle is not for I think being the app in the smartphone. The battle is for the minds, and the attention has become the new currency, and which is where games actually help. The other place where games help is games are always in real life associated with rewards, right? And in virtual life, you don't see a lot of rewards in games. Like you don't bet something and then you win something. So which is where we also felt that Flipkart can play a very important role because it, as an e-commerce player, it can actually provide prizes to people and it can deliver to their homes. So that was another reason. And all in all, I think over time, Flipkart is going to become a group of companies. It's not going to be a simple app. It already has PhonePe, it already has Myntra. So why not build a gaming vertical as well? And maybe start small, but over time it can become a big vertical of its own. And we will only know it like as the time comes. Like I'm not speaking because there are any plans for it, but at least I should have a vision to take it there, right? So, yeah. Sorry, I cannot speak a lot on this topic. So.
Okay, fair enough. We can definitely go ahead with other questions. Of course, guys, if there are any unanswered questions, you can reach out to Deepak even after this session, and he'll be more than happy to help you. So probably let's go ahead with the rest of the segment.
Sure.
Thank you so
So yeah,
much.
retention, I think we've already talked about. Divya, any question or should I move? Move, right?
Yeah, let's move ahead.
Sure. So retention is the soul of the product, which is why you see the soul stone story on the screen, right? This was, I think, the second most heartbreaking scene after I Love You 3000 in Marvel universe, right? But yeah, remember this scene. It's not very easy. I think that the second part, which I want to talk about retention, it's not easy. And that is something also which people don't appreciate a lot. It's actually very hard to move retention up. Just like it's very hard to earn a soul stone, it's very hard. There is a baseline retention for every product, and you often come to know about the baseline when you launch the product initially. And after that, moving 1%, 2%, 10% takes months to years. So I wanted to clarify that because a lot of benchmarks are not available in the industry, and I see the OKRs, objectives and key results of companies defined in terms of 50% growth in retention, because we can do 50% growth in revenue, but they're not the same thing. It's very hard to grow retention. Revenue has a lot of levers. Retention has just one lever, the goodness of the product, right? And retention ka definition also, there is a lot of confusion. But because we are going to talk retention in terms of modeling growth, like how do you create a growth model so that you know a year down the line, what is the daily active user or monthly active user for my product is going to be. So which is why I'm just going to cover one kind of retention, which is day end retention or month end retention, right? The same definition extends to month or weeks or anything. And the idea is that, let's say day 28 retention means that the person first time, and this is important, the first time used the app on day 0, and on day 28 they came back again. So that's very simple. And if you see, like, this is from, I think, Mixpanel. You can say that on January 1st, I think 12,000 people came, 100% retention on day 0. On day 1, 28% of those 12,000 people came, and so on and so forth. On day 7, 15% of those 12,800, 400 people came, right? And we are talking about people whose day 0 was it. Like, suppose you have 100,000 users. For all of them, it's not the day 0. Maybe the new users, like maybe 10% of them, is for whom you should define the day 0. And then those 10,000 you should track the retention. Now, based on the retention that you have, new user retention and the acquisition numbers, you can actually create a growth model. And the output of this growth model is such that you can very precisely predict that next month, 16th of July, what is the daily active users that is going to be. Or next year, 16 July, this is the daily active users that is going to be. And the output is very simple. It's summation of AIRI, where I equals to 1 to n, right? And this is how it looks like, by the way. Like the top line is retention, which is day 0, 100%, day 1, 11%, day 2, 10%, and so on and so forth, right? And the second row is actually 60 users are coming every day, right? And you just create this model, and what you'll see is my DAU is going to be 60 on first day when I launch the product, because all 60 came on that day. On second day, it's 67, because 7 of the 60 that came yesterday actually came, and 60 came fresh today, and so on and so forth. And you can very beautifully create this growth model, which can help you actually assess whether the goals that you're chasing are reasonable or not, and what kind of change in retention do you need to actually achieve this traffic target that you are chasing or revenue target you are chasing, right? So building a growth model is very, very fascinating, very important, very simple also. And I'm always surprised why not everyone is doing it. So yeah, this is retention and growth model. And then we are coming to the last topic, which is experimentation. Any questions around retention, growth models?
Yeah, we do. So we have a question from Rachit. Since the internet penetration in India has increased in the last 4 years, how are the products changing to cater to the new tier 2 and 3 audience who have been acquainted with internet in recent years thanks to Jio. How is it different for products with higher ticket size like gaming and for free platforms, say Pinterest?
So I think this is a good news for Indian startups. The reason is even if our metro and tier one is very similar to a US market, right? Our tier two and tier three is very localized. I think their preferences and their needs and the pricing strategies there are very different from the metro and tier one. The first 100 million users are very different than the next 200, 300 million users who have come thanks to geo effect. And I think the answer to kind of chasing that thing is localization, right? Uh, Localization does not mean like launching the app in vernacular languages. That is one part of localization, but the other is actually catering to the pricing and positioning in the same way for the product. And if you see, I think different segments, like for example, some of the segments are not going to hold up very true in this market. I think especially the premium products, they're not going to penetrate very well, right? Something like iPhone does not penetrate in this market very well. The mid-core products, mid-premium products, they are facing a difficulty of trust because these people don't want to do any transaction, right? So building that trust is very important, which is why, and this is, I think, one of the best things that somebody did in the country. Byju's introduced the feet on street model. They succeeded fabulously. And you can expect Baiju Ravindran to actually do that. I actually love the guy because he's a teacher, right? And he has taught people in both tier two, tier three, as well as in tier one cities. He knows what it takes to convince a parent. And that is the localization. Like something like a Khan Academy will never think of that. But Baju Ravindran, who has taught families in India, who has talked to parents in India, actually will do that, right? Another fabulous example is Unacademy, right? Which is shoot from his smartphone and then become a teacher. Only a guy who comes from tier two, tier three will be like, oh, you don't have a laptop, but you know how to teach. How do you do that, right? So I think the mid premium products are going to have a pull only when you attract both the sellers and buyers on your platform, because the sellers will come first, just like Unacademy teachers came first from tier two cities, and they will say that, okay, I trust this platform, I'm going to make some money out of it. And because they are coming, the buyers will also come. Then people will start paying you some money and then some more money and so forth. So trust is a big issue in localization in India. And then there is a third category, which is ShareChat, TikTok, right? They are there. Like no money, I think India people have time. And which is an unfortunate reality. I don't say this lightly, which is an unfortunate reality that people have a lot of time on their hand. But the other part of the equation is also true because of that. All these localized platforms like Hello, ShareChat, all these platforms are actually booming very well. Now, whether the business model will actually be there for this market is still a question, because my sense is advertisers don't want to go there because there's no spending capacity, right? So a lot remains to be proven there, right? But the chance for mid-premium and free products is actually very good in India if they solve the trust issues and if they figure out the business model. So one is on users, one is on the company.
Thank you so much, Deepak. We have another question from Shruti. She asks, for a new product without competitors, how do we measure willingness to buy?
Amazing, amazing. So you should, Shruti, you should read something which Professor Clay Christensen, he was a professor at Harvard. He wrote Innovator's Dilemma. And his claim to fame, I think the only, why you should read it, because Steve Jobs was a big fan of him. So I think making Steve Jobs a fan of yourself is a humongous task. I think very few people have achieved that. He wrote something called Job to be Done, right? Job to be done is basically, think of it like you are making a drilling machine, right? To put a 1-inch holes in walls, very safe to handle and all that. Now the job to be done for most of the people, when they think about it, is building that drilling machine safely and everything. But the job to be done is that 1-inch hole in the wall. And if it can be done through the machine, it can be done otherwise also, which is where you fumble a lot in tier 2, tier 3 India, because people are doing the same thing in different ways. So the job is the same, but the means to do that job actually change. So irrespective of what you are building, somewhere, somehow people are already getting the job that you are getting done through your product getting done, right? Maybe through some pain, through taking some shortcuts and all, but identify the job that you are getting done to your product. In absence of that, actually the viability of your product is at risk, because it's very hard to kind of convince people to do a new job, right? So I don't know the exact nature of your product, but my sense is it is helping people solve something in a better way, or it is helping people make money, right? Or reduce time or anything, right? And that is a job. And your question should start from there, right? Whether people want to pay for that or not, right? Your product, your question should not start from the features of your product, but just abstract out a level up and start from there.
Okay, thank you so much, Deepak. We just have one last question before we move to the next segment, which is how do startups with external growth loops become successful and really do effective piggybacking? Important fundamentals to focus on.
So startups should actually like focus a lot on piggybacking. First of all, like for example, I think every startup actually has an adjacent market or an adjacent platform, right? To give you one example, like Airbnb, when it started, it piggybacked on Craigslist because people used to put things on Craigslist, right? Similarly, I think a lot of startup stories you will see, like some blogs which became famous, they piggybacked on Y Combinator's this Hacker News, right? And a lot of people start writing at Medium and then they move to their own platform. So piggybacking is very important for startups to get their first 100 or 1,000 customers. And this is one topic that I'm going to write about in go-to-market strategy also around next month. So yeah, keep an eye on that. But there are other ways for startups to grow also, right? Like what Paul Graham keeps saying, do things that don't scale, which is like you can actually reach out to 100 people on your own and you can try to convince them to use your product. It does two things. One is it helps you understand if you're actually solving something which people will pay for or not. And it also gets you in touch with reality, right? You cannot build a product, start digital marketing on the first day. That's a very good way to fail. But the better way to succeed is actually do some organic hacks and also kind of try to find people in your own network who might find this whole thing useful. I'm not going to take any further time. I don't know if I answered this question or not, but if you have any further question, I think please feel free to post it out and I will take that up. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Let's move
It's a
forward.
hard question, Divya. So I think it will be hard to justify any response to it. It's a blog post kind of question. But any follow-up question, please put it out there and we can take it after this.
Fair enough, fair enough. We can go ahead.
So the final one, right? Experimentation. And the reason I wanted to cover is, again, lots of misinformed notions around experimentation. People love A/B testing because it makes them look cool. But the problems are something else. Like we'll talk about that. Very quickly, A/B testing, there is a hypothesis for people who haven't been through the terminology. There's a hypothesis, which is variation B is better. This is a hypothesis. Then you make both those versions live and you try to reach a significant traffic level, right? So something like a p-value should be less than 0.05, which means that you are 95 to 99% confident that this result will hold on a larger scale. Okay, if you make this version live for 100% people, it will still hold the results, right? In 99% of cases. So significance, hypothesis, Then A/B testing is basically two versions you are testing on a particular group. Multivariate is basically you are making 3 or 4 versions if you have more traffic and you are testing everything together. So companies like Google, Amazon, they do multivariate, but startups mostly go for A/B testing. The only thing I want to mention here is the significance level. There are calculators for calculating like significance level and all. I have shared the link in this PPT also. You can go through that. You can use the calculators for knowing if your A/B test is pushing out significant results or not. So this is the slide I was talking about, which is the notions, right? Early stage products, A/B testing is not very useful because you can actually go for big changes that can shift the whole baseline, right? Early stage products may the optimization on buttons and colors don't make a lot of sense, and they also don't give you a lot of goodness. Right now, when you are at an early stage, you have the luxury to break the whole product out and build it again. So focus on that. Focus on making conversions move by 10%, 20%, 50%, 100%, 200%. And I, for one, know that that can be done, and I have done it, right? So don't go for optimizations on early stage. Don't go for A/B testing. Go for it in growth stage. And because of 3 reasons, actually, not 2 reasons. One is when you're testing it, you're not pissing off a lot of old users because you don't make this change to everybody. You make this change to 10% of users and then you scale it up. So if those 10% like it, good. If they don't like it, you piss off 10% of users, not all of the users. The second is you're able to get the preciseness of the impact, right? Because in bigger companies or bigger products, everybody is trying to do a lot of things, right? So you should be able to say, because of this change, we actually moved the needle, right? So to understood that precision with which the needle moved, you need to kind of do this A/B test. The third is your traffic is large enough. So you can do the test and get the results in a single day, right? Which again is a problem with early stage products because you have to wait a month to get a result. Now, why would you do that, right? So yeah, check out the A/B testing calculator and try to see if you are able to get the significance levels in a month, in a week, in a day, or how much time. And then decide whether you want to go for an A/B test or you want to break everything and make it again, right? Now, the problem with A/B test is you don't have a lot of ideas, right? And I actually want to thank Lenny. Lenny writes a lot. He led growth for Airbnb. He wrote a blog post around this, which I loved and which actually resonated a lot to me. So I took that blog post, I added some of my additional insights, and I kind of put it there, a laundry list on how to come up with ideas. The first is talk to customers. We all know that, or talk to sales or CX. The second is data and user research. We have already covered that. Third is use your product. If you're not using your product, you are managing a very bad product. And you probably should not be the product manager for that product. Then there is think in a quiet place and write something. Writing actually fills the gaps. So remember the time when you actually explained the feature to the engineers and it made a lot of sense. And then you started writing it and you're like, oh, this flow does not make a lot of sense. The reason is writing actually fills the gaps in your thinking. Speaking is very easy. Giving funda is very easy. But writing something in a flow is very difficult, which is why like think and write everything you're thinking. Having small discussions with teammates. Why small? I think there's a counter to that later on. Working backwards from a long-term vision, right? So a lot of time we start getting busy in the smaller details. We lose track of that long-term vision, which is we have to solve this problem for user. If you think backwards from that, to solve this problem, what do I have to do? It actually helps rather than coming up with ideas and then tying it to the vision, right? And this is my favorite. This is something that I have added. Broaden your knowledge across functions like marketing, sales, AI, ML, because the cross-functional ideas are 10 times better. You will become a terrific PM like down the line because you understand, you can speak the language of data science, you understand the limitations of data science, you can sit with marketing, help with the brand image, positioning, everything. You can sit with sales, craft the sales pitch, and actually improve conversions more than you can do with any A/B test, right? So broaden your knowledge into these areas. and create user journey storyboard. This ties to actually the writing everything. When you write everything, you are trying to create a story. Now, this was all internal. Externally, do industry analysis, like read Porter around this, right? Do structural analysis of an industry, find holes into the industry, into the value chain, and you might be able to craft a very unique positioning for your product. Look at the competitors, what they are doing, but don't copy it. For example, look at the App Store reviews for competitors. Like, what are people complaining about? Solve that out. Solve the pains that people are explaining to you and your competitors. Also read how tech companies are built. Like before coming to Flipkart, I read around how Amazon was built, how Walmart was built. And believe it or not, like the way Sam Walton built Walmart, if he were there when the internet era actually happened, it will be very difficult for Amazon to build itself. Because if you read the story of Sam Walton and Walmart, he was the guy who was always on the cutting edge of technology. Unfortunately, he died in 1993, and after 1 or 2 years, Amazon happened, right? But he was the guy who introduced check-ins through computers and everything in 70s when computers were very nascent, right? So if you read the history, it gives you a lot of perspective. If you read the history of Amazon, you know how AWS evolved. Like how does a e-commerce company builds AWS? You understand the problems with it, and you understand the alignment, how that alignment comes with a commerce company. Look at the adjacent markets, you should always look at gaming and gamification when you're trying to solve growth. You should look at behavioral marketing, behavioral analytics when you're trying to go for market, like GTM when you're defining, and so on and so forth. Look for adjacent markets to see like how things are evolving. Look at analogous businesses in completely different markets. So for example, one of the best things that you can do is look at Southeast Asia to get inspiration for products built in India. Look at China, because China is a closed market, right? And see what they have done there and try to get that into India. Catch technology shifts, right? I think that this was very obvious. Don't do this. Don't have like 20 people in a room and try to brainstorm. People will eat each other's in that room, because the egos actually come when the number of people in the room is very large. So don't do that. Don't be a busy bee. Like I actually hate when PPMs in my team are always busy doing something. I'm like, okay, why don't you take some time off and go read something? Like read something, watch something, do something. Don't just kind of keep working on a particular problem, because what happens is you don't get a lot of inspiration. You don't get a lot of serendipity out of that. Copying what your competitors are doing, this is an illness in our generation. Like I've seen people coming and telling me that, oh, Amazon is doing this, let's do this. I've seen people coming in MX Player and telling me Hotstar is doing this, let's do this, without actually thinking through their advantage is this and they can do this, whereas we cannot, right? So for example, Amazon can afford to burn some cash because it has AWS, which is a cash generator. Would you say the same thing about some other person who is creating a video app, right? That Amazon is burning cash in Prime Video, so we should also do that, right? Or something like any other app, right? Amazon is just an example, like Microsoft. Would you compare what Microsoft is building being in Slack? Maybe no, because Microsoft has a very different distribution network than Slack, right? So obviously, like those are good at the surface, but dig deeper, like go double click on that, on why they're building it, where does it fit into your own product strategy, and then take it ahead. And finally, avoid hippos. Indian culture and even the Southeast Asian culture, we are very authoritative, right? Which is why like we transfer that authority figures from home to our offices. And we always listen to the highest paid person in the room. It's a cultural fallacy that we have, but yeah, let's try to rectify it, because the person who is highest paid in the room will not have the best ideas. He might have the ideas which most of the people align with, but at the end of the day, it's your neck on the line when the products don't work. So don't listen to that guy. Uh, just say that, oh, I am considering it, but yeah, it goes into my icebox or some other narrative framework that you're going to use. And yeah, I think that's all. The bonus tip that I'm going to offer towards the end of it is develop heuristics over time. Now, heuristics are rules of thumb that you remember because you don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. So you manage the team at one place, you don't want to make the same mistakes or same things next time. So you develop these heuristics, one-liners that you keep reminding yourself not to do again and again and again. Examples from this talk: retention is the great indicator of product market fit. There's no point spending for growth when there's no PMF. If retention is flattening, don't push a lot of money into marketing to show growth for investors. Network effects are a rare moat. What I mean by is it's very hard to get network effects in your product. Like those are very different products. Telephone is a social product. Facebook is a social product. TikTok is a different product. It will not happen with every product, right? So don't try to overfit that thing into your product. Virality is a unicorn. Don't bank on it. Ideas that get viral, people who built it, they didn't know it will go viral. If it was so easy, everybody would be doing it. So yeah, don't do that. Use pirate metrics, which is acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue, to identify problems in the funnel and solve. In the early days of product, pick big ideas for experiments. Use AA test, which is making no modifications and keeping two variations of the same thing live. What you see is one variation is performing better than other, even if these are the same thing. So use AA test to see the robustness of your experimentation framework. If similar designs are giving the different output, then how much can you rely on a variant results, right? And then conservation of intent. This is something which Andrew Chen talks about, which is it's very hard to change intent in a funnel. Like you can ask people to sign up for your product, but to pay for the product, you have to fundamentally change the product. So improvement in one part of the funnel is not a reflection of improvement in other parts of the funnel. But somehow conservation of intent holds true unless you introduce some flux into the system, some entropy in the system. And yeah, I think that's all. I think we are over time, Divya. And,
yeah. So would it be fine if we take? Would it be fine if we take a couple of questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. Going ahead, we have one question from Yash. He's asking if you could walk us through how you actually incorporated some of the things you shared with us today in a project of yours. For instance, the PMF survey, the Satisfy framework.
See, the thing is, unfortunately, I cannot talk most of it because it's a IP knowledge sort of, right? But the reason I put it there is because it works. And for example, usability test that I mentioned, we used at Housing, and I have kept doing that in all the companies that I've worked at. I also use pirate metrics and retention curves to track on a daily basis and on a weekly basis if the product is actually doing well. And the survey I actually used for Growth Catalyst, so that I can talk about. So Growth Catalyst, I started a couple of months back. We already have 1,500 subscribers to it. And the reason was twofold. One is I actually piggybacked on LinkedIn for that. So I have a good network at LinkedIn because I have been involved in helping a lot of people. So that actually came handy. And the second thing was I actually roll out this survey every week. And then what I realized very quickly is initially when I started Growth Catalyst, I thought that my audience was marketers and this senior PMs or group PMs, lead PMs. But very quickly I realized my market is people who are aspirant PMs because they are loving this content, people who are early stages of product management, people who are in marketing, people who are analysts, and all these folks, right? So it actually helped me figure out, like actually validate and reject a hypothesis. And now my content has become a lot more sorted. I first started with sharing just few articles, and then I realized that they're not serving, doing the justice to the audience that is there, which is aspiring PM and all. And then I started writing longer posts. So kind of that is helping me. That acts as a self kind of correction mechanism in my whole journey with product growth catalyst. So I have been using the whole thing that I've shared with you on a regular basis in that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll just take one more question, and then the question left would be answered maybe later because we're already running over time. So we have a question that, as we know, gamification can help us in activation and retention. Is there a framework we can use to understand what type of action and reward gamification would help in improving the above matrix?
Yeah, so see, I think gamification, if you have to think around gamification, the simplest framework is think around the core loops of games, because gamification derives itself from games. The core loop of games is like you rightly said, Divya, and the person asking the question, there's an action, there's a reward, and then there is a progress, right? So most of the time we are operating on the action and reward. We like, you do this, I'll give you some discount, right? But we often miss the progress part, which is actually vital to kind of improve the retention. So every gamification construct should have all these three ingredients, right? So suppose you are building something around, let's say, sales event, right? So your gamification construct should be such that it asks people to come every day, do few things, and then they're progressing. They're reaching a journey, right? They're covering a journey. They reach a milestone, and they will unlock something, right? Something like a game. Other things is, I think litmus test for gamification is it should evoke some emotion. So think of the emotion it is evoking, right? So something like in context of Flipkart, let's say, or any e-commerce app, you add to cart and I give you a discount. It does not evoke an emotion. It's a transactional thing. So it's not gamification. Gamification is something like you come here, you roll this dice, and I've created a path. Along the path, there are different discount coupons. And depending on you rolling a dice, I think you move 3 steps and you unlock a discount around, let's say, clothing, right? Or if you got a 4, you kind of got something around electronics. So that evokes some emotion in your mind. People get excited. Oh, this is good. Or something like which Google Pay did, which is like collect coupons. Collect actually not the coupons, but stickers, right? So you are collecting stickers, and you know at the end of it, there is 50 rupees waiting for you. So people actually got excited around that. They were asking other people and all that. So all these gamification construct, if you see, they excite you, and they also have action, reward, progress. All these three ingredients. So think of your constructs in that manner only.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have some specific questions, but we'll probably take them later, post the session. We'll probably drop an email to everyone with the answers to that. A good question, a question which might help everyone, including me, for who's a completely non-tech background, is that we see that you read a lot of books and you read a lot of articles. So would you mind suggesting us some of the articles, resources, etc. that you like the most, and you use it also a lot?
Yeah, definitely. So Divya, like you said, I think I can also put a slide around that, right? And when we send it to people, it will definitely help. So folks, I think a few of the things, if you're interested in growth, Reforge has a very good blog. And from Reforge, I think you can discover all these growth leaders in product, right? Another very beautiful, it's a paid thing, but if you can afford it, go for Stratechery. Stratechery is one of the best product strategy newsletters that you'll see. Like, I knew nothing around strategy because I'm a non-MBA guy. I'm an engineer by profession, but Stratechery actually helped me understood the tech strategy. The guy is amazing, and he writes a daily newsletter. So Stratechery is another source for my information. The third is also something which is more serendipitous, which is I use Pocket, right? So in Pocket, whenever I find an article useful, I save it. And then Pocket will recommend me similar articles in my recommended feed. So it's kind of a tool which I'm using to discover new articles, right? And recently, I think I have started writing, so I use Evernote a lot, but I'll not go there. What I'll do is I'll actually add few books and few blogs in one of the slides, which I think people can refer to. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining into the session. Thank you, Deepak, for helping us with so much of content. We surely had a very enlightening Sunday. We have Mr. Subramanian. He would want to ask a question. So probably I'll just unmute him for a minute, and that'll be the last question we'll take.
Sorry, I'm a bit tired, so I will speak slowly.
Sure. We'll just finish it off. Mr. Subramaniam, if you could unmute yourself.
No, I have it. I don't have any questions. It's just by mistake. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thank you so much. So we wrap this session here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this Sunday, and we hope you have a great Sunday ahead, and take care. And for any queries, you can reach out to either me or Vaibhav. You have the Eventbrite online link, so you can just drop us an email there. And other than that, you can, of course, we'll also include the LinkedIn profiles so that you can definitely connect and we can do further networking thereon. And I will also take a moment to give a shout out to all the donors that we have. Thank you so much for donating to the various initiatives that we believe in. And we would be more than happy to see you in the future sessions. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Thanks, Deepak.
Thanks, guys. Have a great Sunday. Bye.
Okay, bye. Take care.